Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 4 of the Faith in Whatever podcast. I'm Josh Carman, moderator extraordinaire, and you can find me on Twitter at Josh_Carman. That's C-A-R-M-A-N. I'm joined this week with James Yule and Garrett Gearhart. Guys, why don't you go ahead and say hello?
Hello.
Howdy.
All right, you can find Garrett on Twitter at TStudentLife and James Yule at James Y-U-I-L-E. And also working all the tech stuff is Chris Carman out of Marion Ranch Records, and you can find him on Twitter at Marion Ranch. Also, you can find us on Facebook, facebook.com/Faith in Whatever. And then you can hit up our Gmail account and send us any email you would like for us to do on the show, any topic you'd like us to discuss, anything that you find interesting that you would like a deeper analysis on, maybe some passage of scripture you want professionally exegeted, whatever. We can do that for a cost. I'm just kidding. We don't do that for a cost.
You won't?
No, I'd do that for free. faithinwhatever@gmail.com or our official Twitter handle, faith, the letter in, and whatever. So we are excited to be back together this week. So we are going to go ahead and just jump right into it. Guys, what have you been up to since we last chatted? Garrett, why don't you start us off?
Yeah, so I've been doing lots of filming at my job, my work. I work at a church, and I'm the director of creative communication. So I've been doing a lot of filming and Bible studies, and we went to a camp last weekend when we did a lot of filming. So I've been really totally focused in on all the tech and media and stuff for editing videos using Final Cut Pro. I'm really excited about. I wanted to bring it to show it to everybody, but couldn't get it out of the office. Is it a gimbal that I have, fully electric stabilizer
Gimbal
for the
I
camera?
don't know what that is.
Yeah, so imagine an upside down bottom of a drone, like a Phantom 3 Pro.
I don't know what that is.
Okay. I can move the camera
Swing
like
and a
this.
miss.
I can move it, and it's fully stabilized using 3 brushless motors and a gyroscope.
Is it the one that spins all crazily?
You don't want it to spin. You want it to not spin.
Oh, okay.
But if you were spinning, it would not spin.
Okay, I don't know what that is.
So I'm going to bring it, and we'll check it out. But so I've just been
Is that like the Wayne's World where it's whoa?
No, it's like a handle you could put on the camera and you move all around, but the camera stays steady.
Oh, okay, got it.
Right.
So it's just a stabilizer. Why didn't you say that? That's okay.
It's a stabilizer. It's a gyroscope. So I've been watching a lot of Film Riot and a lot of YouTube channels, and just totally trying to better my
That's
craft.
what's so funny about all you tech
storytelling.
guys. You guys just use the most fancy of words to describe the most simple concepts there.
What did I call it? A gimbal?
Yeah,
That's the name of it.
yeah, like Brian Gimble. I get it. But
You invented it.
yeah, stabilizer.
He was the prototype, all right.
no problem.
Yeah, that's
Could have
it.
just called it Sally Stabilizer. That's not that big of a deal.
We have
Sally
all kinds of
Stabilizer.
great facts for people here.
Come here for your knowledge. So I'll link some of the stuff I've been working on for my church and personal stuff. People can check it out.
Yeah, that's great. All right, Senor James, little James,
Well,
Scatman James.
a few episodes I was talking about playing the Witcher video game, and if you know anything about me, if I end up liking one IP, I look to see.
What is IP for those of
what's
us with
intellectual
hobbies?
property?
Okay.
So a video game, a movie, a TV show, an IP, right? Intellectual property. If I like one version of it, and there's other versions, I'll try out all the rest. So there's the video game Witcher 3, which I talked about a bunch, but it comes from novels. So I decided to start reading the novels, and I'm on the second novel of short stories. So when these were written in Poland originally, it was 2 novels of short stories and then sort of a saga of 4 or 5 novels. And I'm reading the second one, and they are very delightful. They're a lot of fun. They play on pretty common, famous myths. One of the short stories plays on the Little Mermaid myth, so in the context of The Witcher, he's actually... The Witcher has to translate because the
Sorry, but the original Little Mermaid?
yes,
not the Disney
not the
version.
Disney version,
What's the difference?
It's much more tragic.
right?
Ah,
So
Nice.
he's actually the translator for the mermaid between her, she and the man, the duke, whoever who loves her, and there's a lot of essentially what ends up happening is. It's really a Romeo and Juliet style tale that ends in tragedy, like Chris said, and so there's all these Witcher tales are really play on a lot of famous myths, a lot of I don't actually probably not Grimm's fairy tales, but certainly famous myths, and I've been enjoying it a lot. It's the stories are quite witty and fun to read, and sometimes a little rhetorically difficult, but still like just excellent. And so I've been enjoying that this week very much. Just consuming where this video game actually came from, which was these short stories. Chris, you got anything to add?
Yeah, let's see. My week's been kind of boring. Wife's out of town, so just trying to keep myself entertained. Been watching Lucifer. I don't know if you guys have seen that on Fox.
Yeah, it's right on after X-Files.
No.
James has a lot to talk about.
Don't let that show exist by watching it.
Oh, it's kind of funny.
No, I mean, if it was its own thing, it'd be fine. But it's advertising that it comes from the comic book, and it's nothing.
Well,
like
it's like the same like Constantine, right?
I wouldn't know. I didn't read the Constantine.
I mean, like I liked Constantine as a movie by itself.
Okay.
But it was pretty far from the comic in a lot of ways.
I watched Constantine 9 times.
I liked it as a movie.
Talk about it all the time.
I'm just putting that out there.
So here's an example of the contrast. The original Lucifer comic follows the figure Lucifer in an epic tale that spans dimensions, space, time, war with angels, and all kinds of things. And the TV show is a cop drama where
when it turned into like the first episode, you're like, oh, this is kind of cool. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, it's a buddy cop thing.
Yeah.
Oh. So, I mean, the only funny thing though is that he is the devil, but he doesn't try and hide it. But since he lives in LA, people just think he's just another weirdo.
Right.
He's like, yeah, I'm Lucifer Morningstar. And everyone's like, oh, cool stage name, bro.
Oh, so gross.
It's kind of funny.
It's the worst thing ever.
It's kind of gross. Oh, man. Well, it sounds like it's been a pretty entertaining week thus far. I myself have been diving into Death Cab for Cuties. I don't know what you call it, CD catalog, or, like all of their...
Discography?
Yeah, discography, that's the term there. I grew up loving Ben Gibbard. I'm a huge fan of everything from All-Time Quarterback to Pinwheel to even his individual stuff, his former live album. They just have a million songs. And what I thought was interesting... and I don't think this really translates into any other topic or segment, but I wanted to just kind of share about it and just get maybe a quick initial reaction. When they just released this new album last year in August-ish called Kintsugi. And the idea of what a kintsugi is, it is in the Japanese art form, like when pieces of pottery shatter, right? Instead of like gluing them back together to make them look like nothing ever happened to them, they... use like gold outlining.
I've seen that, yeah.
For the glue.
Precious metals to repair broken pottery.
And so they kind of show, right, just the cracks and the wear. And I just thought that was a pretty good metaphor for life and just kind of what we've been kind of seeing and discussing there. That's kind of sad. I'm not really going anywhere with that, but I really like their new album. It was a step back in the right direction. They just had Christopher Walla, their longtime bandmate and basically the producer of all of their albums, leave, and so they've just parted ways. They didn't really talk about why. And this is the first real album that Ben Gibbard has released since his divorce from the terrible Zooey Deschanel, who I will never forgive for breaking his heart. So that's basically been.
She's the new girl.
She's awful. She is awful. Unless you're watching, then I really like you.
What if
it's
in Elf?
Yeah,
Elf.
you were great in Elf, but that was before she became a terrible human being.
That's blonde version of her. Is there maybe is that the thing? Is there like the good blonde version and the evil brunette
I don't
version
know.
of her?
I've never liked white women. So, I mean, romantically speaking, they're fine as people. But just as far as as an attraction goes.
So you're like the opposite of John Mayer.
And yeah. Although John Mayer is one of my other favorite artists as well. He's getting ready, I believe, to start touring again. So there's rumors there. So that has been my week, largely regressing into my early teenage years, my teenage angst, as it were, and then also just praying for our nation that we don't go to hell in a handbasket in this election season. I am pretty convinced that there's direct correlation between the amount of internet memes that go up and how screwed we are as a political system in regard to the Republican GOP.
It's the first election that memes were really mainstream.
Oh,
so,
man. Memes have been
It's kind of transitioning to slightly more entertaining, though. I mean,
yeah.
The memes make everything more bearable.
I mean, just the whole election is just going to be entertaining.
It's awful.
Politics have always been awful, though.
That's where I get my entertainment.
Right.
Politics. That's the right place for it, right?
That's right. Apparently, it is now.
Running a country.
Hey.
Hilarious.
Might as well laugh because it's better than crying.
Yeah, that's so true. Oh, man. Well, I'm glad to hear we're all back and we're all doing well. We're going to go ahead and jump right into our news topics. An interesting one that has come out, switching from biblical end times to the doomsday scenarios of climate science. All right, this is written by Mike Sandler.
Sounds cheery.
A little bit. It's from HuffPost, and we all know that Huffington Post is an incredibly non-biased, fair news source, and I appreciate their hard dedication towards
objective scholarship.
Yeah. So this one though is not so much that the very thing that I make fun of, but rather it's an interesting concept in terms of the problems that the people who don't find themselves in the Republican right or the far right conservative or kind of the Tea Party-ish would say they themselves, don't identify as such. And there's been this interesting discussion that he poses, he being, again, Mike Sandler, who writes this article. He cites some interesting stuff that I just wanted to kind of get some initial reactions from you guys on. He talks about how, somebody like Ted Cruz or Ben Carson, they display a lack of scientific literacy, as he calls it. And then he also brings in the concept of relying on a literal reading of the Bible to interpret events occurring in the natural world. So
climate events.
Climate events in the natural world. And so essentially what he's saying is that there's a poll that was done that, or a survey rather, that found that 15% of Americans believe the world would end as predicted in the book of Revelation in their lifetime. And then 36% of Americans say that the severity of the recent natural disasters indicate that we're at the precipice of Jesus' second coming. So basically, as the weather starts to get worse or more obscure or hard to predict, right, and we have these severe changes and stuff. Even in California last week, right, it was rainy, and then all of a sudden it was 89 today. My car said 90. My car said 101. So just an interesting, thing to be aware of. And so as those, things are coming up, people are starting to, people who are identified as evangelical rights are believing that this is an indication of Jesus' second coming there. And so it's causing pretty big friction to people who aren't Christian believers and what we're supposed to do and how we're supposed to handle our climate change. So basically what he's saying in this article is that if people were able to understand that climate change is intertwined with ethics, right, like a theology of ecology, as it were, and we were able to step back from a literal interpretation of Revelation, of the book of Revelation, that it might be better for us in terms of creating a sustaining environment in which we can all live together. He kind of purports some ways that he thinks this might be able to happen, but he did point out an interesting reality that out of the 36% of Americans say that the severity of the recent natural disasters show that we're on the precipice of Jesus' coming. Much of them lived in the Midwestern and Southern states that we see. So, or he actually, I'm sorry, he doesn't say that. He purports the if about that. So the question is, what do we do with that?
Okay.
What do we do with our literal understanding? I know it's kind of a lot packed in there. There's a little bit of a ramble.
It's just another way of diverging the actual issue. It's like we've spent a long time trying to convince them that there is climate change. And now that some of these people are becoming convinced that there is climate change, instead of...
Well, you leftists used to want to call it global warming, and obviously the world's not warming, so now you've switched over to a more suitable name, climate change. So what do you do about that?
Oh, Josh.
I'm just posing legitimate questions that people have, myself included.
Well, it is global warming, but the problem is the warming is inconsistent. If you look at a
so
chart,
is it really global warming?
Yes. Josh, stop doing what you're doing. You stop that. But it's climate change towards warming.
That's convenient.
Oh my gosh.
But less people die when it's warmer. So I really think leftists want more people to die.
Probably. For like half a second, everybody's like, oh my gosh.
It's a frustrating thing because this is a way for some to accept that there's climate change, but to still not take any kind of personal, and I don't want to say personal as an individual responsibility, but community responsibility for it, national responsibility, you might say. Because if it's part of end times, then it's really not our fault. It's part of the plan.
Yeah.
Right? B, there's nothing we can do about it because it's part of the plan. Right? And so now it's no longer an ethical conversation. There's no longer an imperative to change anything. There's no reason for the president or for the government to issue any law in regard to climate change. So that's what this sort of interpretation, this sort of bringing revelation into this discussion does. Whether it's intended to do that or not, I'm not saying, but it is what it does.
Right.
Which is frustrating. And, it's also convenient to call it a literal reading of Revelation, as if to say a correct reading of Revelation, when in fact it's just a bad reading of Revelation. That's what it is. It's a reading of a text through our own newspapers, which is, ask any serious scholar of the Bible or just responsible pastor. You don't begin with our newspapers when you start interpreting the Bible. You begin with the context in which those texts were written,
But
and
can
you
it
go
not
out from
mean
there.
more than just that original context, like a double fulfillment, as it were?
No.
Does the text say that?
Wow, that's just not even.
Does the text say that there'll be a? I mean, I know it talks about climate.
Well, there's
in
a lot
some
of like
sense,
the warming of the water,
Okay.
right? Because like the lava from up an exploded mountain falls into the water, destroys like a third of the ocean.
so that would be from a volcano. So what about from climate change?
I'm just throwing out some responses that might be thrown
Okay.
your way, but
Yeah.
I mean, it's a poor.
I mean, it seems to
reading
be
period.
fairly loose connection between our current global climate trends and some specific part in Revelation that talks about.
People who espouse these sort of interpretations. I wish what they would do is take a moment,
Stop.
take a breath,
And stop.
and then look at what this people just like them were doing during the Cold War, which was interpreting Cold War news.
Right.
That was their modus of interpretation, where Russia was the power being spoken of in Revelation, and the Cold War and the threat of nukes was what Revelation was talking about. That was the language of yesteryear from the
forming
same
of
sort
the
of
UN,
people.
United Nations.
Right, and of course it was wrong, right?
Right.
The Cold War ended quite uneventfully and kind of fizzled out, and the two countries got along for quite a while, and all those or the same people who interpret the mark of the beast 666 as meaning Ronald Wilson Reagan, right? Because he
Barack
happens to have
Hussein Obama.
well, in this case, because his three names happen to have 6 letters each, right? It's always a bad idea to begin your interpretation of the Bible with our current day news. That's a very arrogant position.
That's about. I think that it's really the height of arrogance. That Jesus is going to come back in my lifetime.
right.
Yeah.
Tell that to the Millerites.
Right.
And
People
Chuck
have been
Smith.
saying it since what the
Just
apostles thought Jesus was coming back
sure.
in their lifetime.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Paul was wrong
So, yeah.
in his eschatological understanding.
And if Revelation's actual revelation,
Sorry,
excuse
Dad.
me, if its actual message is about the end times, and that's what it's about, then why did anybody read it until the end times, right? Like, how does that help first century Christians who are dealing with persecution and terrible life events in their lifetime? Revelation, if you're correct, then Revelation has nothing to say to them, right? Because it's
Right.
only about us. And so it's a useless document until we exist. That's an arrogant form of interpretation. So, beware of even well-meaning but ultimately self-serving interpretation.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit difficult, right? This was an interesting thing. I was reading Chuck Smith before he passed away. I was reading some of his literature. He wrote that the world was going to end in like 1981, and then that actually ended up being incorrect. And,
Oh, really?
Yeah, so they just kind of adjusted, right? But nobody ever really said anything about it. It was just kind of like, okay, well, we're just going to keep right on moving and just skip it and, not worry. But I think it's interesting when we talk about doing exegeting
Is it fine?
correctly. We discuss the idea of having we're starting, right? We always want to start from the original context. And so that's a little bit of a nugget, right, for any of you out there who actually like to study Scripture, you never want to begin, again, like James was saying, with your own presuppositions and reading them anachronistically into the text, meaning bringing your own stuff into the Bible there instead of letting the Bible just speak for itself as a collection of documents. And this becomes pretty pertinent when we discuss our theology of ecology, because if we are, like Genesis talks about, literal or metaphorical, right? We're still tasked with this responsibility of taking care of the earth. And as Christians, we should be leading the way in terms of helping do things that will help sustain our planet. I mean, we have a direct responsibility before God and the church to be individuals who take care of the planet on which we live. That being said, I drive a Mazda, so I don't know how much that helps.
Master's programs are budding up all over the place that deal with ecology as a religious imperative.
Yes.
I know Claremont has an ecology degree now in its School of Theology. So very interesting times for us.
Yeah, big deal. So if you are watching, you can reduce your carbon footprint by walking more. Carpooling is a good one.
Tips from Josh.
Using replaceable products. You can make your own toothpaste. You can make your own deodorant. You can make your own shampoo and conditioner. It's pretty interesting. I watched a lady do it.
You can also grow your own food in your backyard and avoid trips to the grocery store and processed foods.
Right. So meaning you can avoid beaver anal scent glands on the food that you consume, like we talked about last week.
You grow and raise beavers for that specific purpose.
Do you know, I have to watch what I say here because I'm not sure of the details. But it's illegal.
That's never stopped us before.
Right. It's illegal for a community
to grow beavers.
To grow, for a non-farming community who don't have license to farm, to grow product to trade with each other so they can be self-sustaining.
Yeah,
it's actually illegal.
Yeah, because you don't want people getting sick if things are done improperly.
And it's also illegal to collect rainwater in California.
Yeah.
Which is interesting.
It's kind of a long story, but we actually had chickens in our house in Michigan. We had to get rid of them because of our county said that where we lived was too congested. Too congested, even though most people in California can grow chickens in their backyard.
California just passed a law that you can use your front yard to grow
because that was an issue, right? So people were being made to remove their garden from their front yard because it was an eyesore. So put back that dirt lawn.
Yeah, which is an interesting. So be aware, right? I think as Christians we can all think turn off the water when you brush your teeth. That can waste up to 4.
I was programmed to turn off the water when I brush my
That can
teeth.
waste up to 4 gallons in a minute. Colgate taught me that.
Thanks, Captain Planet.
Heart! All right, so moving right along. You can find us on Twitter. I'm at Josh_Carmen. He's at TStudentLife. That's Garrett. And then James is at JamesYuile. Chris is at Marion Ranch. Find us on Facebook.com/faithandwhatever. You can find our website, faithandwhatever.com. There you'll find us on all the other social media platforms on which we can be found. We are currently still waiting for iTunes to load us up into their feed there so we can be found on that and other podcast aggregates. And then lastly, if you have any type of conversation that you would like to have with us, or if you would like us to cover a specific topic, please feel free to email us at faithandwhatever@gmail.com or send us a message on the Facebook page.